Hi everyone, it's William. This is the Grand Duke Dmitri diary series. We also have letters and a few other things. And we're doing part of the Grunwald letter to Maria today. Another chunk of that, a big one, I hope. That it was written on the 6th of June, 1939, and I'm inside. It's an absolutely glorious day, and I was really trying to set things up on the terrace where I haven't done the terrace of the apartment, which is really big and nice, and yeah, trying to set things up. But the brighter the sun gets and the more glorious the day, it seems like the harder it is to deal with the light, and my camera screen, my phone screen just kind of is me against a backdrop of nothing, and I can't see what's on the screen unless I get really close and squint and shade my eyes. So I just decided, what the heck, I'm just going to do it inside. We're getting into some serious content too, so it's not just sort of the fun stuff, scenic stuff. Yeah, anyway, both in 1915 and in 1939, we're getting into some serious stuff for different reasons. Well, in both instances, war, of course, although the war hadn't started yet in June 1939. So, and I will be in transit soon. So I am going to be leaving next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, first for Zurich and then for France, and then leaving from only overnighting in Paris, and then leaving from there on a flight to Seattle next Friday, and then spending the night in Seattle, and then finally getting home via train on Saturday, the 21st, I think it is. And so I don't know, I plan to do more. I've got the weekend here and that sort of thing, but things get so hectic. And I hate to interrupt this part of the series because, like I said, we're getting into some really, really serious and interesting things. But anyway, that's my heads up on things maybe being a little disrupted for about a week, but we'll see. Okay, so what's our recap? Well, the last video was 1915, and Dmitri was just spending the afternoon and evening alone in Usovo because his last sort of companion / attendant, who was a gentleman and not a servant, had left, but only overnight. And yeah, and then I talked quite a bit, hopefully not too much, about his state of mind and this sort of blasé attitude that he seemed to have from what he wrote in that diary entry toward the war. So if you haven't watched that whole one, do please go and watch it. This is what makes this whole thing meaningful to me, when we can really talk about where Dmitri was at in his whole life trajectory, and get the big picture of how he changed over the years and so on and so forth. Now, yeah, what was our last 1939? The day before yesterday, that was just again the talking about Leonard and how he could perhaps be persuaded to help out. He'd already made an offer of help that was considered by Grunwald to be quite inadequate. But anyway, how Maria could get help from Leonard and from his grandfather Gustav V of Sweden. All right, our cast today is a pretty big one. The people that, of course, not that Dmitri is talking about, but that Grunwald is talking about. And one of the people that he brings up is Dmitri. Dmitri at least makes an appearance in this particular video. Another one is the Duke di Spoleto. I don't know how to pronounce that. He would become, later on, when his father died, the Duke di Aosta. I don't know how to pronounce that either. And Princess Irene of Greece. Irene, of course, being the Greek form of the name, but I'm just going to go ahead and call her Princess Irene of Greece. And then a mystery woman called Donna Vera. I don't know who she was. And then Dmitri's, the man who had taken over from the general, from Grunwald as Dmitri's private secretary, Spichevsky. Okay, so here we go. We're resuming this topic of Maria's situation if she returns to Europe, as Grunwald is urging her. Okay, one way or another, I hope to have the pleasure of seeing you appear on the banks of the Seine in the very near future. The Grand Duke has been absent from Paris almost continuously from the beginning of the year, first in Monte Carlo, then in London. I've only seen him 3 or 4 times during all these months. Each time I had the opportunity to speak to him at great length. But now he will be obliged to stay here for some time to complete his installation, so you're pretty sure to find him in residence. It's true that there is still this wedding of the Duke of Spoleto, who has decided to abandon in favor of your august cousin, Princess Irene of Greece, our charming friend, Donna Vera. And then in parentheses, I will never forget the delightful description she gave us of her stay on the island of Brioni and her dull tete-a-tetes with the Duke, all in her inimitable accent, end of parentheses. I guess I should know who she was. I just didn't look it up. That was silly of me, because if she was maybe his female companion, or I don't know what, before he sort of dropped her for Princess Irene. Okay, here we go again. But I would be surprised if the Grand Duke stayed in Athens during the summer heat, though there has been talk of a 3-week stay in Greece for passport regularization. It is all the more desirable that your Imperial Highness should come now, because the future may still hold many surprises for us in the political sphere. Towards the end of June or the beginning of July, your Imperial Highness is still sure to find everyone in Paris. For my part, I will not leave the capital before the end of July, and will therefore remain at her complete disposal. I think, madam, that if you could take up residence at the Hottingers, it would in any case be the most preferable thing, in anticipation of all the conversations you will have with your august relatives. If I felt I had the right to whisper a word to Madame de Hottinger so that she could extend you an invitation, I would be delighted to do so. And to end this painful chapter, I would like to ask one more question. Does your Imperial Highness recall that she owns an apartment in Monte Carlo? Is there any issue with furnishing it or doing something with it? Spichevsky told me about it, incidentally. The Grand Duke might also think of it and ask about it. The possibility of living there must be considered, and you must have an answer ready, whatever it may be. And now, having exhausted this subject, having expressed myself on the personal problems that concern you, madam, with complete sincerity and frankness, for which you will be kind enough to excuse me, I can finally move on to a problem of a more general nature, that of politics. Okay, that's a big chunk, and maybe I shouldn't have been that ambitious, but because there really is a lot to say. So we find out that Dmitri had been spending his time in Monte Carlo and also recently in London. And we are going to hear a lot more about the time that he spent in London, because in this very letter, Grunwald is going to tell us about that, and it's some of the most fascinating information that I know of. Now, Dmitri did have diary entries for the 1939 and 1938, but they're scanty. And so, yeah, you really need other sources to fill in the blanks. Why was Dmitri speaking to Grunwald, who had such nasty things to say about him and who honestly seems to have been spying on him? Well, I mean, maybe he just didn't know any of that, what was going on behind his back. And certainly Grunwald was a very intelligent, very well informed, and very well connected man. He had a background, a legal background. He'd gone to law school. He had a diplomatic background. And so he was, in that sense, a good person to know. And, you know, the advice that he's giving to Maria, it may not be correct, but he's really thinking it through, and he's really trying to, you know, and I'm sure some of the things he said were very true and very relevant, probably a lot of them. So I guess I understand why Dmitri was talking to him. I just would like to know to what extent Dmitri understood what was going on behind his back, and that, yeah, Grunwald wasn't just sort of an irritating person, but, you know, someone who was keeping, really deliberately keeping an eye on him. And I wonder if there was any intelligence aspect to that. I don't know enough about Grunwald. I wonder if he was giving reports, you know, he had all these diplomatic connections, and I wonder if he was giving reports to anyone. And you might ask, why on earth would Dmitri be important enough at this point for anyone to want to spy on him and give reports about him? Well, he was, you know, he was very, very tuned in and active at this particular time, and it's thanks to Grunwald that I know, you know, as much as I do about that. This was one of his most politically active times, it seems like. So, and he was meeting with extraordinary people, you know, and people like Churchill, you know. And so, yes, he was someone that it was, I suppose, worth keeping an eye on. But the question is, was Grunwald keeping an eye on him only for Maria, or was he keeping an eye on him for, you know, the British, or the French? Or, you know, I don't know. He wasn't pro-German, so I don't think he was keeping an eye on him for them. Okay, so, you know, and later on in the diary, since it'll be a while till we get there, since it's 1940, in one of his letters to Maria, Dmitri will say, you know, he wants money from me. He calls me up, and what he wants is money. And so that's interesting. Anyway, here we go. What next? So Dmitri apparently needs to establish residency in France, even though he's been living there, really, for, you know, more than a decade, off and on, but still, that was sort of the main place. But he is a stateless person, and so apparently, I'm guessing this whole mysterious thing about the flat that he'd rented, that Grunwald thought maybe Maria didn't know about, that he'd rented this fancy, expensive flat, so he couldn't possibly be hard up for money. Well, you know, maybe he had to have a permanent residence in France, and he wasn't going to go and just rent some cheap place, because that's just not something he would do, even if he didn't plan to be really living in the place. So that could explain it. You know, that could be because he had to have, if not property, which he didn't have anymore, he needed to at least have a permanent address. So his Nansen passport would be expiring in you know, the first month, April of 1940. So, and with everything the way it was in Europe at that time, things were getting a bit dodgy. Anyway, so the Duke of Spoleto, who would become the Duke of Aosta, well, my friend Ed Hansen wrote a biography of the Duchess of Aosta, not Princess Irene, I think. I don't know. I'm stressed out right now because, you know, I hate traveling, and I'm going to be traveling, and I'm going to be making this huge transition that is the one thing I don't like about going back and forth between Switzerland and the U.S. So I just overlooked these things. But apparently, Grunwald thought that Dmitri would probably go to the wedding, which I think they were actually married in Italy, but Grunwald seems to think that it will be in Greece. And in fact, Dmitri had gone and spent time in Greece the year before, in 1938, for a funeral, I think. It was one of his Greek uncles had died, I think. And he went and he spent quite a bit of time there. And he also went to Germany for a wedding. Was it one of Cyril's daughters, I think? And so that's really interesting stuff, but we're going to have to go backwards in time at some point to get to that. Yeah, so anyway, what I'm getting to is there was this connection to Greece. And you remember from one of the letters that Dmitri wrote to his sister in October 1939, he was talking about Greece being the place that he would go once he was discharged from the sanatorium. You know, not 100% sure, but that was what he was thinking at that time. Okay, so returning to the subject of Maria and Grunwald, it's interesting to me that Grunwald kind of goes in and out of this ultra level of formality. So saying Your Imperial Highness is one thing, but that could be considered really actually way too familiar. The third person was kind of a little, that was more correct in some instances. So he would be talking to her, but he would say, I hope Her Imperial Highness will find some value in this advice instead of Your Imperial Highness. So he mostly calls her Your Imperial Highness and Madam, but sometimes he goes ultra formal and uses the third person and refers to her as her when he's addressing her. And how did Dmitri and Maria feel about that in general? I think Maria was more, I can't say for sure, but I think she was more insistent upon things like that. Dmitri, I think, would go casual pretty quickly if he was around people that he felt comfortable with. When he was with in Monte Carlo, I guess, Ed says that people there just referred to him as Dmitri, whereas in other places they were more formal. And I can't imagine them for very long calling him Your Imperial Highness or His Imperial Highness at Schatzalp. I mean, probably at first, but then my assumption is that he would probably make it clear pretty early on that, yeah, maybe you don't call him Dmitri, but you don't have to go through this His Imperial Highness kind of thing, or Your Imperial Highness. Okay. Yes. Polly told me about this mysterious sea voyage he took in the 30s, and also he himself talks about being on the banks of the Red Sea. So when would that have been? I just don't know. There's a gap there. Okay, August relatives. I guess the August relatives are, of course, Dmitri, but also, the Swedish royal family and Leonard and who knows who else. I was taking the word hotel literally in relation to earlier on when Grunwald referred to the Hottinger Hotel. But of course, those are tricky words in French, especially. Hotel isn't necessarily a business where people go and book a room for a holiday or whatever, and then check out. A hotel, I remember from Proust, because I think he was living in an apartment in the complex, the main building. There was a main building, and then there were apartments and a big courtyard, and it belonged to the fictional, I think, Duke and Duchesse de Guermantes. I have no idea how to pronounce that. And it was called a hotel. But it was, you could have a long-term lease. You had an apartment. It wasn't anything like living in a hotel, like even in this apartment that I'm doing here at Schatzalp. So it sounds to me like she had a house, some kind of palatial residence, and you could get a flat there. This Madame Hottinger, so I don't know who she is. And of course, a casino is also not a casino necessarily in Europe. It's a place of entertainment. It's not like a casino, where it's just gambling. So for instance, gambling isn't really allowed here, as far as I know, in Switzerland, but there's a casino in town. It's called a casino, but it's not a gambling place. It's not a place you go in to play baccarat or something like that. It's just, various entertainment options. Okay, now this really, it cracks me up, but it also aggravates me. Yeah, you own it. Oh, by the way, have you forgotten? You own an apartment in Monte Carlo. How do you forget you own an apartment in Monte Carlo? I mean, I guess there are two kinds of poverty, right? There's ordinary poverty, and then there's Imperial Highness poverty. Although maybe I should give Maria the benefit of the doubt that there was something wrong with this apartment in Monte Carlo. I guess maybe, yeah, that's kind of what Grunwald is asking. Does it need furniture? Is there some reason why you can't live there? You know, was it like an investment and it was a cheap apartment where she wouldn't want to live? Did somebody leave it to her in their will and she didn't even know about it? I mean, I know that Monaco is a tax haven, but were there really no taxes on this property? But, you know, Grunwald is basically telling her, if you're hitting people up for money and saying I'm impoverished, then you kind of need to have an answer, including to your brother when they bring up the fact that you own an apartment in Monte Carlo and you could live there. So it's interesting that it was Bichevsky who knew about it and who told Grunwald about it. Wow, he's not a very discreet person for a private secretary, is he? Not at all. Good Lord, was he on Grunwald's payroll or something? Anyway, yeah, so if Spichevsky knew about the apartment, then Dmitri knew about the apartment, and, you know, that may be one of the reasons why he's not so receptive to sharing his own income with Maria. And he didn't own property, as far as I know. I've never heard, you know, he was asking friends to store his things when he came to Chateau. Once Beaumaniel was gone, he didn't own property in France, but she did. Okay, so what do we have next time? Well, in 1915, we have Swedish sleighs and French novels and a fun diary entry, not one of the serious ones. Although, yeah, like I said, those are on the way. In 1939, well, this is a little bit, you know, for me, I guess it's hard for me to not go through to skip big parts of this letter, because for me as a historian and as someone looking at Dmitri's whole life, it seems extremely relevant. So there are going to be a couple paragraphs where Grunwald, why can I never think of his name? Where he is talking about the political situation in Europe in a very interesting and well-informed way, in a very prescient way. He was a smart guy. He could figure things out, apparently before other people who should have been able to figure things out could. So those are very interesting, and I think I'm going to go ahead and do them just because I think immediately after those paragraphs, he starts talking about how Dmitri fits into that political context. And so I think it's important to have that. So he won't, in those two paragraphs, be talking about Dmitri or Maria. He'll be talking about, you know, Goering and other people. But I'm just going to go ahead and read through them and not, you know, do them all at once. And we'll have that out of the way, and then we can really understand when he starts talking about Dmitri and what he's doing politically. Okay, so I think I'll see you tomorrow. I think I'll be doing another video tomorrow, hopefully. Although one of the filmmakers from Marseille will be here, but I think I'll be able to. And yeah, okay, take care. Bye.